Hello, and welcome to Circulating Conversations, the podcast where we discuss library topics, genre deep dives, and book recommendations. I'm your host, Rachel, an adult services librarian, and this is my guest.
My name is Sarah, and I am a library assistant.
Thank you for joining me, Sarah.
You're very welcome.
All right, so since this month has Valentine's Day in it, we figured it would be a good time to do a deep dive into the romance genre.
Yes.
So to start off, we're just going to talk about the definition of it. So according to Romance Writers of America, they state that the two basic elements that comprise every romance novel is a central love story and an emotionally satisfying and optimistic ending. Would you agree?
I think that's pretty on par. You know, when you get into series, you might not get that happy ending at the end of the first book. It might take a couple books to figure out who really needs to be ending up together as well. So,
right.
But it always comes eventually.
Yes. Now, I did think that emotionally satisfying and optimistic are a bit vague. So they did kind of break down the definition for those as well, and also for a central love story. So they defined a central love story as the main plot centering around individuals falling in love and struggling to make the relationship work. And they said a writer could include as many subplots as they want as long as the love story is the main focus of the novel. So I think that makes sense. Everyone can agree on that.
I think so.
Why it would be considered a romance based off that.
Yeah.
And then for an emotionally satisfying and optimistic ending, they say that they categorize that as the lovers who risk and struggle for each other and their relationship and then are rewarded with an emotional justice and unconditional love. Now, I think emotional justice is also a little bit vague.
I feel like that depends on the subgenre under romance of what justice is taking place and whatnot, you know?
Well, I have to say this definition really made me think, because when I think of a happy ending, if we're going to call it that, and I think the reason they didn't use the exact term happy ending is because when I think happy ending, I'm thinking they're ending up together.
Yeah.
You know, there's no tragedy happening.
True.
But we have stuff like The Fault in Our Stars and The Notebook.
Oh, absolutely.
Both
Some of these romance stories are so sad in the middle.
So sad or bittersweet.
Yeah.
Or, you know, it ends, like, in those two cases, it ends in death.
Yeah.
Sorry, spoiler alerts.
Yeah, if you haven't read those, tough luck, guys.
And so, like, that's quite sad. But I think I can kind of reconcile that with, like, even though the ending is sad, like with The Notebook, it's ending with them, you know, dying together, like old age. They've had their relationship.
True.
They've been through their love story.
Yes.
And they're dying together. And then The Fault in Our Stars, again, it's like, you know, you're taking something away from the relationship, even though it wasn't able to go past, you know, that point. So I think that's kind of what they mean by emotionally satisfying. So it doesn't always have to necessarily be like happy. It can be sad or it can be bittersweet. I guess it's just like how the relationship itself ends.
That's true. And I mean, I just thought right now of emotional justice, that statement, so to speak. It could also go into emotional justification, like the justification of the feelings that the characters develop for each other also. That, you know, a lot of the tropes of people being unsure when they're starting to have feelings for someone else, usually in the end when the two main characters do come together, there's a justification like, hey, those feelings were correct, you were on the right path, you know. So it's another way to look at it, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. So now I'd like to go into a brief history of the romance genre. So this was kind of interesting to me because some people say that, you know, I suppose technically speaking, you can say, you know, there have been love stories like all the way back to ancient times.
Yes.
Like ancient times, medieval times, there have been love stories.
Yeah.
But I guess the reason that most people say that the romance genre actually began in the 1700s is maybe because of the definition that they settled on, that they're like, one, before that, it's not what maybe we classify now as a romance.
True, absolutely. And I mean, you speak about there can be love stories and romantic stories, but actually having a romance novel is like, we didn't get our printing press till later on,
right?
But after ancient times as well, you know? So there's some different ways to look at it also.
Right. So So again, 1700 is when it actually began. What's considered to be the first known romance novel was Samuel Richardson's Pamela or Virtue Rewarded. And that is about the love between a female maid and her land-owning master. Yeah, it's an interesting one.
I was going to say, I have never heard of either of those. Maybe we need to do a deep dive, figure out what those are about.
I read a little bit of what
Did
it's
you really?
about, and I would not recommend it. Let's just say it was different times
Fair
about
enough.
what would be considered romantic.
Oh, yeah. I'm
Yeah.
sure that we're going to get into that also later on, but
Yeah.
I smell what you're stepping in there.
Right. It's basically like a hardcore pursuit from the man in a
Yeah.
not so virtuous manner, we'll say.
I got that.
And then,
yeah,
but
I
it's like, but
understand.
then she's rewarded at the end by having him like genuinely propose to her.
You know, it doesn't necessarily have to go about that way, though. You could actually respect the person that you're pursuing from the get-go. What a concept.
Right. So yeah, I mean, I'm not going to tell anyone to not check it out. I'm just saying I wouldn't necessarily call it romantic by today's standards.
Fair enough.
All right. So after that, the romance novel really hit its stride in the 1800s with Jane Austen. I mean, she's probably one of the most prolific romance writers
I'd
out
agree with
there.
that.
I mean, first author that probably comes to mind to me, especially if I'm thinking from the past,
Yeah.
it's going to be Jane Austen. Have you read Jane Austen?
I haven't read as much as I would love to of Jane Austen, but I have watched a lot of the remake
Yes.
movies, you know, the hand clench.
Oh, yes.
It's so good.
Yeah.
No, but I've been meaning to do a deep dive into old romance novels and some of the other classics as well, so it's on my list.
Yeah, the only one that I've read is Pride and Prejudice as
Yes.
well. And I do love it.
Yeah.
I like when I read classics and I'm reminded like they have a good sense of humor from back then. Like the
it's so
dialogue was really
reassuring.
witty
Yeah.
and I love the dynamic.
Yes,
in it.
absolutely. Agreed.
So then we're jumping forward a lot to Harlequin novels that came in around 1949, but didn't become popularized until the 1970s. So these are novels that were marketed towards women and sold at supermarkets and convenience stores for cheap prices. They often had predictable plots and happy endings. And also during this time, historical romances became more popular as well as adventure stories. Have you ever read a traditional, like, what would be considered a Harlequin romance?
Honestly, I don't think I have, you know.
Yeah, I haven't either.
No, the closest I think that I got was when we were weeding our romance paperback collection here at the
You just flip
library.
through.
Yeah, and they just crack me up because I feel like romance novels, there's definitely this thought of, oh, those are the dime store paperbacks that
Right.
your aunt reads on the beach at her beach vacation. And that's not all that romance novels are anymore. So it's kind of interesting how there's all sorts of different styles of it, I suppose.
Yes.
Yeah.
And speaking of that, so bringing us to the 21st century, more changes happening with a genre that includes diversifying main characters and plots to incorporate identities that had not previously been represented. So yeah, like neurodivergence, LGBTQ plus, more, like Black, Asian, different main characters. Really started booming in the 21st century, which it's always good to have more diversity in it.
We love to see representation.
That's right. All right, so I wanted to ask you, what is your relationship with the romance genre?
So I grew up on Disney princesses, like most little girls in the 90s did, and romance was always a big part of it. They were going on these big adventures to either be rescued by their happily ever after Prince Charming, or they were put in some sort of danger and the Prince Charming was saving them. Started from a very early age there, and then as I got a little bit older, I went into a big period, I guess you could say, where I was reading a bunch of the historical fiction, mainly around the turn of the century, like 1880s to like 1910, in the Wild West.
Oh,
I'm-
okay.
I love cowboys to begin with, and the whole Wild West, just civilization and different aspects of life from that time period anyway. So a lot of those were about a educated woman from the East going to the West to either be the local school teacher
Right.
or helping out with something, and then finding true love along the way. And I've just kind of kept up with it ever since. There's a big fantasy romance genre that's out right now as well,
Right.
that I've kind of gotten into as well. So it's been a long road, but we're here and we're still in it.
Yeah. I will say I am not big on the romance genre. Don't generally seek out one that would, based on definition, would be considered romance. I like
Fair.
romance as a secondary plot. So
I do like that as well.
yeah, something where something else is the main focus,
Yes.
but then within the story, there's also a nice romance. That would be
Yes.
my preference personally. Now, I also wanted to ask you, do you think romance gets a bad rap as a genre?
I think it does, to be honest, because there is a lot more to the romance genre than just smut. It's not all really, really graphic. It's not all just physical things. There is a whole other spectrum of romance genres to where you're dealing with interpersonal and interpersonal relationships between cultures, between different types of people, and to just write it off as just being a escape for
Right.
that kind of thing is a little closed-minded, to be honest with you.
No, yeah, no, I agree. I think I was talking about this with someone, and we were saying how romance, probably the most important thing is the characters, because to me, it really all is about the development
Yes.
of the relationship, and yeah, having those interpersonal relationships,
Yeah.
like you said.
Absolutely. And a great thing that happens in some of the romance novels that I do read, not only are they learning how to communicate with another person, but usually the main character finds out different aspects about themselves that they didn't understand. It could be triggers from their past to where it pops up in the new relationship, and then they're able to, instead of shutting that down and not paying attention to it and creating an unhealthy relationship because they're not voicing what's going on, they're able to talk about it with their new partner or other
Right.
main love interest or whoever, and that way they're able to overcome that on a personal note also, which I think is really important also, especially when you get into representation with different cultures and different sexualities and stuff like that as well. It's very nice to, even if you're not part of the community, it's very nice to have your eyes open to that
Right.
and learn about that perspective.
Absolutely. Now, do you feel, because I was thinking, for example, this is representing a relationship. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about who's reading romance, like who is the audience for it. But do you think that there is a responsibility in romance for the relationship that's being portrayed to be healthy? Like, because some people will criticize romance books, and it's definitely not the whole genre or anything,
No, for sure.
of showcasing unhealthy relationships.
I wholeheartedly agree. That is one thing that I cannot stand, is when an author uses their platform. It might not even be their first book that they put in those unhealthy relationships or just really not good examples for the demographic who's reading it, whether they're young or old. If they see a behavior being portrayed with a happy ending, even though the behavior at its inception was incorrect or toxic or wrong, doesn't make it okay that it ended happy in the end, because unless it's addressed and it's a growing point in the story or whatnot.
Right.
But just to get away with it because it's a romance genre and it's not as criticized as heavily, I think is very irresponsible for authors to do.
Okay. And I like that you take that stance, because sometimes I never know with certain things if, like, I'm not giving enough credit to the reader. Let's say that they could read something like that and be like, oh, this is just fiction. I know that that's not what actually a good relationship looks like.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, they really don't have any examples. Like, a lot of
Exactly,
people.
and-
like, no one's teaching them what is a healthy or a
Correct.
non-healthy relationship.
Correct.
So sometimes they do seek that information out
Yeah.
in something like a romance novel. So I do think that it's important that authors try and portray a healthy relationship.
I absolutely agree. I mean, it goes back to as an author, I'm sure that they try to know their audience. However, you do not know the type of life that your reader has had. You don't know if their relationships have been happy or healthy, whether that be romantic relationships, familial relationships, anything like that. So even if a book in the story has toxic behavior or unhealthy behavior or controlling behavior, a lot of times, or at least I'm seeing that with the contemporary romance genres, it will have like trigger warnings at the beginning of the book that'll say, listen, like, main characters in this book are exhibiting this type of behavior. If you see similarities in your relationships, here are some resources to where you can get some help, because this is not healthy and this is not what you should be pursuing. Because if you're a person that has had unhealthy relationships your whole life, you're not going to know what a healthy one looks like. And if you see that being solidified even more by having an author taking that standpoint as well, you're not going to know anything different, and then
Right.
you're going to be stuck in that cycle.
Yeah, and I would say it's awesome if authors are doing stuff like that. I didn't know that, actually.
Yeah, some are, some aren't, you know,
Right.
depends, but
Yeah.
I am seeing more of it, and it's very encouraging, so that's nice.
Right. And I do want to say, like, no shame to anyone who, like, enjoys
No.
books that go towards that, like, read
No.
what you want. It's just important to me that someone would know what's fantasy and, like,
Correct.
what's good in reality.
Yes, agreed.
So then, do you think the popularity of romance novels are going up and down right now?
I absolutely think that they are going up. I am on TikTok personally, and book talk genre
Yes.
within, or subgenre within TikTok, however you want to call it, there are more and more and more videos. And not only are they all within the romance genre, but I think that there's a big resurgence in just reading books in general. And but I do definitely see more romance climbing up. And like you say, like, your preferred way of reading romance isn't necessarily the priority in the book. It's like a adventure or something with a secondary romance
Right.
underneath it. You know, I feel like it's weaving its way into other genres with having that secondary plot, which I think is really cool, because you can have the best of both worlds.
Yes. And based off statistics, romance is on the rise. So the romance genre is the highest earning and fastest growing genre in fiction. It made over 144 billion in revenue, with 39 million printed units sold in 2023, and it contributed to 66% of adult fiction growth in 2022. So it's definitely on the rise, and I do think part of that is because of Book Talk.
I think so.
Yeah. And I also think because of Book Talk too, it explains why now, in the past, the average, like, age for the romance reading group was between, like, 35 to 54.
Yeah.
And now it's skewing younger, between 18 and 54. So I would definitely say Book Talk is probably the cause
I
of
think
that.
so. I think so too. And then also social media in general. I know that for different series of books that I'm reading, there are Facebook fan groups that you can join and discuss different theories and all sorts of stuff like that. So
Right,
it's all
BookTube,
over.
yeah, so-
There's all sorts. There's resources on YouTube, Instagram, just about any social media platform that you can imagine. There's a community there that you can tap into and enjoy as well.
Right. So what are some of your favorite subgenres?
Subgenres for me, I do still, starting out with the turn of the century books, I do still love a historical romance. I also, like I mentioned earlier, I am was trying to read more fantasy genre books, and I am picking up some that, like you said, aren't straight up romance novels, but there is romance stories within the fantasy books, and I'm really enjoying those too.
Yeah. I would say those actually, if I were to read romance, that those hit mine too.
Yeah.
That I like historical.
Yeah.
Probably going towards like Regency or Victorian
yeah.
or something.
Hey, Bridgerton is real.
Yeah. And then same with fantasy, because I don't know if paranormal and fantasy overlap or if they're considered different.
In my mind, they are cousins.
Yeah,
They're very close.
There's a
you know?
divergence, though.
Yes.
Because that's what I would say. Because when I think paranormal, I'm thinking werewolves,
Correct.
vampires,
Yes.
ghosts, I guess.
I could see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then when I think fantasy, I just think more the setting is a magical place.
Yeah.
You
No,
know what I
I
mean?
agree with that for sure. I do think that there can be overlap with those two subgenres, but then you do absolutely have books that are completely separate. I mean, going back to Twilight, that was not historical, it was present day.
Right.
You know? But I think that definitely keeps me one foot in the fantasy genre also, just growing up
Yeah.
with the Twilight books and that whole
Absolutely.
craze that happened also. But yeah.
So now I want to talk about romance tropes. And I don't know, I think this is something where people can be very opinionated on it.
Oh,
I know I am. So what are some of your favorite tropes?
Okay, so for everybody listening, Rachel gave me what she was picking beforehand, and it was really interesting because we picked the same trope as one that we didn't necessarily like that we'll get to in a minute, but
Yeah.
it had a different name, and it just goes to show there are so many different tropes within romance
Oh, yeah.
genre that it is just, it'll make your brain swim. But
I looked at a list that was like 150
oh
long.
my word.
And I'm not even sure if it covered all of them.
Honestly, it
So-
probably didn't. There's just so many, and it could start out as one, but then it like scoots to another by the end of the story,
Right.
and you don't even know which end is up by the end. But yeah, some of my favorite ones are the Grumpy versus Sunshine. I really, really love that kind of trope. And then I also, this one comes with like added stipulations. I enjoy forced proximity. However, that forced proximity has to be initiated by a third party. I am not one for the like stalker or
Oh,
one of
yeah,
the
yeah.
main characters
So you're
are
talking
forcing.
like trapped in an elevator.
Trapped in an
kind of
elevator,
thing, or-
also kind of like forced to go on an adventure together, and
Okay.
then along the way they fall in love, kind of deal, or they both have a common goal that they didn't know each other at the end, but by the end they find that familiarity in each other
Right.
and fall in love in the end as well.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I like that as long as it's not imposed by one of the main characters, because I don't like that.
That makes sense. I have caveats to mine too.
Right? There's always a caveat. There's always a sweet spot. It's okay.
Did you have a third?
I mean, I do also, it's not like a whole trope, but the whole thought of touch her and die kind of vibe.
Okay.
Like just having the protective energy there and
Yeah.
the loyalty from another main character to their partner, I think is really cool also.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll talk about my three too. So my number one is enemies to lovers, and I
Classic.
rank that as my number one.
Absolutely.
To me, I like love stories where the relationship starts at 0. So like I would prefer strangers to lovers over friends to lovers.
I
Like
agree with that.
my biggest thing, and I kind of said this before, is the development of the relationship. That's what I like to read about, because for me personally, once they enter the relationship and it becomes about them being in the relationship,
Yeah.
it gets a little boring for me.
You want the journey before
Yeah,
they get
I want
there.
the journey. So, so with enemies to lovers, it's kind of like you're starting at negative.
True. Very true.
Now, of course, we can't be talking like serious, like
Yeah.
that one of them or both of them did like something really seriously wrong.
Yeah, no, for
and
sure.
that's where it's coming from. more like maybe a misunderstanding, like not fully understanding each other.
Yeah.
So yeah, so like a
Preconceived
enemies
notions,
to friends
yeah.
to lovers, that kind of journey
Okay, I like
is
that.
my favorite one. Along that same vein, again talking about, starting from zero and needing to develop the relationship, my next one is arranged marriage or like marriage pact.
Yeah.
We're going into a situation where like, you're not prepared to love this person, but you kind of have to work it out.
Absolutely.
And I just think that that's an interesting scenario to be in.
Absolutely. I think that going back to the first romance novels that I had in the Western turn of the century vibes, there was a lot of mail order bride stories in that era also that kind of start from absolutely nothing, but trying to make something of your life. Let's try this out, I guess.
Right. And again, there's like caveats. Like, I don't like it if like one of them, I mean, I can completely understand in the situation if like one of the characters is like, I hate this situation. I don't want to be in this situation,
Yeah.
because it is something that they're forced into. My thing is like they can't be in that mindset for too long, especially
Fair.
if it's affecting how they're treating the other person,
Yeah.
where it's like,
I
well, I'm in
agree.
this situation too that I didn't
Yeah.
ask to be
Hi,
in.
I'm also here.
Yeah. And it's like, why are you the only one that gets to be grumpy about it?
Exactly. No, I agree with that for sure.
Yeah, so it depends on how it works, but I love that one too. And then as my third, I chose fake relationship. I've read some where it's like you're asking a friend to do or something, someone you know to do fake relationships, and then I've read others where it's like a mute cute where like you happen to bump into them and
Yeah.
then suddenly you blurt out like, oh, this is my partner.
Right.
And then you're
Getting
like,
hit
please
on
help
by
me.
a creepy guy at the bar. Please
Right.
pretend to be my boyfriend.
And then it goes on from there. So I really like
Exactly.
those as well.
Yeah.
Now, what are some of your least favorites?
Ugh, okay. My least favorites. I do not like amnesia tropes.
Same. I didn't list it, but same.
Yeah, I just no. Let's not. Revenge blackmail, like you said, also. And then this is the one that is one of Rachel's least favorite, also, that I didn't know had a different name, but I don't like drastic age gap romances. I think it gets kind of creepy really quick. Just in my opinion, if you like it, go for it. As long as everybody is of age and consenting adults, that's all that matters. But it's just not for me personally. But I didn't know that that's also referred to as May to December trope. I had no idea. I was just like, oh, I wonder what that is. And I was doing my
Then you looked it
research
up.
and I was like, no way.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel the same way. You use specifically drastic age gap, and that's
Yeah.
how I feel too. As long as we're above the age of consent, if there's a
Exactly.
bit of an age gap, it's not a big deal. But if we're talking like, like I would say
Yeah.
10 years plus probably, or maybe even like 5 years, over
Yeah.
5 years.
I feel like it's just, I personally don't see myself falling in love with a grandpa, so I don't really want to read about it.
Yeah.
Just my personal opinion,
Yeah, but like you said, again, everyone's
each their
welcome
own.
to read what they want.
Absolutely. Not at all.
And then the thing that I have that, we didn't talk about was love triangles. I'm just not about it.
I understand that also, and I feel like I'm a little bit scarred from that from Twilight. Everybody and their mother, was it Edward or Jacob, and it's just
Well, like, what are
drawn
you
out.
trying to get out of it?
That
Like, do you want me to root for one person? Do you want me to root for both? There are some
Yeah.
cases where we're supposed to be rooting for one, but people are like, no, the other one is better. And then you kind of also already know who it's going to be. Like, even though they
Exactly.
introduce another option, you're kind of like, I know they're going to end up with the
and
other
then
person.
it's like, why are we wasting our time?
Right.
Did we just need to fill more pages here? What's going on?
Yeah, so I don't get the point of it, because if I'm reading, like especially with something like Twilight, where Jacob, like you know he's interested
Yeah.
in Bella, but he's obviously starting off as the friend,
Exactly.
and Edward is the clear person that she is going for.
Exactly.
So it's like, why are we throwing a question into this when we know, like, Edward's who she chose first, Edward is going to
Yeah.
be who she chooses last.
Exactly.
So,
Let's just focus on the growth of that relationship there instead of throwing a wrench in everything.
right. So that's my personal opinion, and it seems like that's how it goes too. Like with like All the Boys I've Loved Before, like same thing. Like the person she started with is the person she ended with.
Yeah.
Even though I'm not going to say that some of the other characters that they introduced were like good love interests.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess it's in some ways it's kind of nuanced.
Yeah, true.
When you are actually introduced to two good candidates.
Yeah.
It can be nuanced.
There are some special exceptions, you know, here and there, and I feel like there are so many different ways that any trope could kind of turn off the tracks and go down another trope side and then come back at the end and still not be where you thought it was going to go. But either through those other people being introduced, we're learning something new about our main character. We're learning something new about what they're looking for in a relationship when those other ones do not work out in the end. So I understand sometimes why they're brought into the picture, just for us to have a better understanding of what's going on or what we want at the end for our main character. But then sometimes it was like, why were they here? Why? Who invited them?
I mean, listen, I'll put a caveat on this too. My caveat being is if the second choice is obviously like a why would they go for this over the other person sort of thing, then I don't get the point of it.
Yeah.
If it is a little more nuanced where you're like, both options are really great and I'm interested to see which one is chosen and why, then that's a little bit more interesting to me.
No, I agree. I agree for sure.
Yeah. So I'd be interested in the comments, like if Love Triangle is like a favorite of anyone listening.
Yes.
You know,
how?
Yeah. Talk about it in the comments.
Let us know.
All right. So can you give us some book recommendations?
Okay. So, again, talking about how romance isn't necessarily the first priority. It's a giant series right now, the Fourth Wing series by Rebecca Yarros. I really, really enjoyed the first book. I have the second one waiting for me at home to crack into, and there is so much really wonderful world building and character building within that book, with romance really taking a backseat until the very, very end of the book. I really enjoyed the fact that it was not just focusing on the physical relationship in between the two main characters, but it was able to create this world that I think is going to be able to sustain the series really, really well. So I'm excited to read the next books, and as they continue to come out, I would definitely recommend that. Also, I wanted to recommend something along the same vein, but not as fantasy. It's more historical fiction, is the Veronica Speedwell mysteries by Deanna Raybourn. I really enjoy it. I just started reading those the past few months, I would say, and it's definitely like a slow burn romance. There is definitely like two specific main characters that they're going to end up together, and there's obvious attraction there, but nothing has happened, and it's almost maddening. Like, when is it just going to happen? Just kiss her, But it still hasn't, and I'm about to start book 3. But again, there's so much going on, and it also incorporates my all-time favorite genre, which is mystery books. I love a good mystery. My comfort TV show is Murder, She Wrote. So anything that can like incorporate all of these together, I am all for. And it's also historical fiction. It's set in the UK back in the, I want to say probably late 1800s. And they incorporate a lot of what's going on at that specific time in history, and talking about settings and outfits and all sorts of different things like that. So it was really interesting also. I haven't finished the series. I'm about to start the third one as well. But I'm interested to see how that one goes. And then I also wrote down the Lore Olympus series by Rachel Smythe. It was my staff pick that I did.
Yes.
And that, honestly, it's just a retelling of the love story between Hades and Persephone, which, I mean, if we're talking love stories from long ago, that's ancient, a really old one. But it's done in a modern way, and it's actually a graphic novel that started online. And I just really love the illustrative style within that story. I think that they're beautiful. it's really an interesting retelling of it, and the way that the author paints certain like gods and goddesses in certain ways that really I haven't seen before, that I thought was really interesting. But still, the main vein throughout is Hades and Persephone's story. So those would probably be my top 3
I actually
suggestions.
do know Lore Olympus.
Hey,
I have read
there we
Lore
go.
Olympus, yes.
There's supposed to be the next one coming out, I think, in the next couple months here, maybe in May of 2024.
Really?
I think so.
I need to get back into it. I forgot where I ended on it.
Fair enough.
I think I have an idea, but this time I won't spoil anything, so I'm not going to say where I
We
think
should
I am
definitely
on
put a
it.
spoiler alert on the beginning of this one.
Oh, yeah. Well, those books have been out long enough.
I mean, agree, but gosh, just in case. I don't know.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for joining me and for giving me your book recommendation.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure.
And thank you, everyone, for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode and join us next time on Circulating Conversations.